Now to the papers as usual. There's the front of the Observer, slightly overtaken by events. Corbyn told, take blame for poll flop, or we face disaster. Well, he has already taken some blame this morning. There's the Mail on Sunday with a very tragic story there of a little girl, a 5-year-old girl, who was 4 minutes late for her doctor's appointment. He didn't see her, and then she had an asthma attack and died. Many other similarly sad and difficult stories in the Mail on Sunday today. The Sunday Times there. Benefits for migrants face the axe. A very, very complex series of proposals for the government, it says there, for foreign workers, visas and much else besides. And then finally we've got, what have we got here? There's the Sunday Express, volcanic rages of cesspit killer. You may remember this is probably the worst murder story that I have read for a long time. I'm not really an aficionado of murder stories, but this was a particular stinker in every possible way. So to the papers, and we have to start with these by-elections, as we said we were going to, rootling through the debris. Tim, rootle through some debris in the Observer there, big double-page spread.
Yeah, and particularly striking, I think, is an analysis from James Morris, who was an opinion pollster for Ed Miliband in the last Parliament. He understands the Labour Party well, and some of the figures in there. Labour, of course, have lost Scotland. We know now the Tories are ahead of Labour in Scotland.
And today, Jeremy Corbyn is in Scotland talking to the Labour conference up there, of course. It's a big day for them tonight.
He needs to rally his troops, of course. But Labour's now 15 points behind amongst working-class voters, according to this polling. And in terms of preferred Prime Minister, Jeremy Corbyn is 36 points behind Theresa May. Now, this is the core Labour vote, and it's deserting it. And I think what's particularly interesting about what James says is he doesn't just blame Jeremy Corbyn. He says it began under Blair, it began under New Labour. Some of the emphasis they put on immigration and Europe, that created the fissure as well between Labour and its working class.
Poll. There's the grizzled right, the grizzled left on the same subject.
Yes, I mean Tim Shipman in the Times. I mean, a lot of the Sunday newspaper journalists clearly lack sources at the centre of the story. I mean, Tim's story is mainly about people who haven't agreed to speak to him. But I think he gets to the root of the problem, which is well put by a Labour activist called Richard Angel, who's head of the Progress group, the kind of Blairite group within Labour. And Angel's basically saying, look, Labour's problem is, how do you win as a radical left party when you've never been it before, and when there is a very big centre ground, including a lot of working class people who are not as radical as you? That is the problem that people like me face, who support Corbyn and did support him, carry on supporting him. And I think Copeland was the wake-up call, because they buried UKIP in Stoke. They destroyed Paul Nuttall. But the wake-up call in Copeland was, you can't go on. The NHS and just issues that have been key for you for 20 years don't necessarily work in the new light of the situation. You have to find a new set of answers.
So my question to you is, why does it not connect anymore?
We're going to talk about Brexit, but Brexit has reframed everything. So has the coming, I think, secession of Scotland from the United Kingdom. I think that will and probably should happen. And many people in Labour think they can get around these big existential issues, right and left, Corbynistas and Blairistas.
With the old songs.
With the old songs. And I've been saying, you know, until you get a clear position voted on by the party on Brexit and free movement, you will not really make much progress.
Gina Miller, you of course led the fight again for the Article 50 debate in the House of Commons, the House of Lords, and you're back at it again. Your first story is from the Independent, I think, on the iPad,
yes,
as it has to be these days.
Yes, on the Independent front page, they've quoted me as saying that the Lords need to show backbone this week, because all these debates are happening because of my case. You know, we are exercising parliamentary sovereignty, and the will of the people does not mean or does not negate the weight or the wisdom of the Houses of Parliament. And that's what I'm fighting for in my campaign that I've launched this week.
And to be absolutely clear, what the House of Lords is going to be voting on and what you want is a slightly tougher promise in the legislation about the kind of vote at the end of this process. It
is an amendment, because, you know, in the Sun they're talking today about the Brexit ship. What I'm saying is we need lifeboats on the ship. And that amendment is saying that I'm calling for, and the Lords hopefully will pass or will agree this week, is that there should be an amendment which says in 18 months' time it is legally required for the Houses to have a vote on all options.
And we're seeing Michael Heseltine swinging back through the jungle after a long period of silence, and it's going to be his fight back. And
well,
he
very
says,
interesting what he says.
What he says basically in that article is, if the public opinion in the UK changes over Brexit, there has to be some kind of new exit route, whether it's another referendum or an election or whatever.
But it's exactly what I'm calling for, which is this vote in 18 months' time. And he says in the article here in the Mail, is that, when we are out of all the elections that are going to happen in Europe, we could be in a very different place. Europe itself could be in a very different place. So we should have a vote at that point.
Tim, what is wrong with this?
Well, this is not, of course, the first time that Michael Heseltine has caused trouble over Europe for a female Tory Prime Minister.
That'd be true.
This is what he does. But you compare what he is saying, and I'm afraid what Gina is saying, to someone like David Cameron. And I wasn't ever David Cameron's #1 fan, but he said very clearly before the referendum, there won't be a second vote. This is the one time we will make a decision on Europe. And then the decision was taken. And we can't keep revisiting it.
But this is not about a vote with the people. This is about Parliament doing its sovereign duty.
This is Parliament potentially unpicking the vote of the people, and that's, I think, incredibly dangerous.
What are you so frightened of Parliament having this debate? Why?
I don't mind Parliament having the debate, but ultimately Parliament should respect what the people decided on the 23rd of June. What I regret for someone like Michael Heseltine, I think he has an enormous amount to offer to the country on economic policy and strategy and particularly industry. And if only he would focus on that, because unfortunately the whole debate in Britain at the moment is so focused on Brexit.
Like it is.
We need to broaden it.
Paul Mason.
I think, in a way, all the furore around Copeland has occluded something that we learned from Stoke. When Labour went to its core voters and said, we're going to tell you, because we have to, because we're under challenge from UKIP, what Brexit means. Labour really engaged with, what does Brexit mean? There was no standing there, as there are in the salons of London and the nice dinner parties, saying, let's sabotage it, let's stop it. They said, we'll make it mean something for you. And I think that really my side of politics has to accept that this vote has happened. Now, at the same time, we have a right to vote against and veto it if we don't get what we want during the process.
But that is what Michael Heseltine is offering you, in effect.
Absolutely. No, and I think he's right to do that. But the content of it is there's two different Brexits on offer. There's nothing else. I think people really need to get their heads around that. And I've supported your case. I think the case is good. But we need to be saying to people, don't think that you can sabotage this. It is not democratic to do so.
It's not about sabotaging it.
Yeah.
I mean, we need to get on and trigger Article 50 as soon as possible so we can see Mrs May's hand. She says, unless it's triggered, we won't see that hand. So we do need to say that, but we then have to have this vote in 18 months' time.
Now, the other party, rather interestingly, which is under real trouble because of what's happened over Brexit, is UKIP itself. And there's a Nigel Farage story. Nigel Farage and Aaron Banks, they've both been on this show, both saying they're absolutely fed up with the current leadership of UKIP.
UKIP's extraordinary. You think that, as you said in your introduction, think that Labour has internal problems. UKIP is another case altogether. But I think the fundamental problem for UKIP isn't just that the Brexit issue has taken away the Europe issue from them. You look at where Theresa May is repositioning the Conservatives, much more sceptical about big business, tough on immigration, very hawkish on things like foreign aid. Very different, really, from where David Cameron was taking the Conservative Party in a slightly more liberal, centrist direction. So UKIP's ground has been completely taken from underneath them. So they can have a little bit more money from Aaron Banks or whatever, but what's their purpose now? I don't know the answer
what are they
to
for?
that.
So there's also a cultural issue in this in terms of the kind of things that politics are interested in. There's a story about Shami Chakrabarti, who's coming on later in the show, and mobile phones for prisoners. Gina, I think you've...
Yes, it's a story here that's in the Mail on Sunday talking about this, and I have to say I find it incredible that this should be that this story is even in here. Of course, they shouldn't have mobile phones. One of the biggest problems in prisons is drugs, and and there is proven evidence that the police service, the prison services, cannot cope with what's going on with drugs in prisons. And mobile phones have all been identified as one of the ways of prisoners getting drugs. So, this is just
we'll certainly talk to her
unbelievable.
about that in a moment. There's lots in the papers that we could be talking about, but one of the really extraordinary kind of spectator sports is Donald Trump versus the American media. Paul Mason.
I'm afraid I just cannot see this as in any way funny or ironic. I mean, we have a man with huge executive power, and the office of the American presidency is invested with 200 odd years worth of executive gravitas, declaring war on the liberal media, effectively using the same terminology that the Nazis used about the media that opposed them in their rise to power, and by calling them the enemies of the people. You know, a man who came to power on fake news, a man who is even now, according to stories in these papers that he's trying to suppress, and is trying to fix the security and intelligence services of the United States. Is declaring war on the media is a very dangerous thing to do.
Well, look, I don't defend what he's doing at all, and I agree with everything that Paul has just said. But there was a poll. In
Fox News, which has not, of course, been banned and is still popular in the White House.
And to their credit, quite a lot of their journalists are saying, standing with CNN and others and saying this is wrong. But it was a proper poll. It wasn't just sort of a Fox News viewers. But why Trump is doing this is reporters are less trusted even than Donald Trump. 45% trust Trump to tell the truth, only 42% reporters. Of course, Trump is wrong to do this.
Maybe the liberal media, maybe the mainstream media has got something fundamentally wrong. Maybe
I think what it's got wrong is the assumption that facts win arguments. The New York Times, one of the banned newspapers, it's sometimes unreadable for the amount of fact-checking and caveats that the journalists are supposed to put into it. Yeah. What Trump is good at is a narrative. His narrative is BS. It's rubbish, but it's not backed by fact.
But it's emotion as well. It's emotion.
Final thought from Gina.
I was going to say it's about emotion. And that's what Trump is doing. He's actually tapping into people's emotions. And if that's what they want, then, you know, that's where the media is suffering. And it ties in with, you know, we've got the Oscars coming along tonight, and they're expecting a huge number of the stars to be making very political statements. Now, I think the stars are going to have to be careful here. You know, it could be completely overboard. But at the same time,
Trump will enjoy the attention.
I was going to say he'll enjoy the attention, but it's very interesting that actors feel that they have to step in where others are not standing
I know
up.
it's very strange and it's slightly disturbing. No actors on the sofa today, but thank you all very much for an interesting and relevant paper review. No fake news, no false facts, just hard, crunchy facts.